It all started on a quiet Sunday afternoon in a peaceful suburban neighborhood. Birds chirping, lawnmowers buzzing, and then sirens. Out of nowhere, the calm was shattered by a screaming 911 call. A woman, later identified as the president of the local HOA, was on the line yelling, "He's after me." Her voice was full of panic. But what happened next took everyone by surprise. This wasn't a case of someone being chased. It was a twisted tale of entitlement, assumptions, and a whole lot of drama. The man she was accusing, a new homeowner simply out doing yard work in front of his house. That's it. No confrontation, no threats, just a guy minding his business. But in the eyes of this self-declared protector of the neighborhood, that was enough to cause a full-blown scene. Within minutes, police arrived, neighbors gathered, and cameras started rolling. What the officers found didn't line up with the story she told, and as the truth slowly came out, everything flipped on its head. You won't believe how quickly this concerned citizen turned from calling the shots to being put in cuffs for filing a false report. This isn't just about one person. It's a glimpse into how power trips, entitlement, and snap judgments can spiral out of control in the most unexpected ways. But just when it seemed like everything had been resolved, one final twist left everyone stunned. The new homeowner, Marcus, had just moved in a week earlier. A quiet guy in his 30s, kept to himself, worked remotely, and had been slowly settling into his new place. He had no idea that mowing his front yard and trimming some bushes would set off a chain reaction that would put him at the center of a neighborhood scandal. He hadn't even met most of the neighbors yet, until today. Meanwhile, the woman who made the call, Cheryl, was well known in the neighborhood. As the head of the HOA, she was often seen walking the streets, clipboard in hand, always watching. She'd lived there for over 10 years and wasn't shy about reminding people of the rules. Over the years, neighbors had whispered about her being a little too controlling, writing people up for having the wrong color flowers or leaving trash cans out an extra hour, but no one expected her to go this far. According to witnesses, Cheryl had stormed out of her house yelling that Marcus didn't belong here. Moments later, she was on her phone, pacing in circles, screaming into the receiver. Her story? She claimed Marcus was threatening her, following her, making her feel unsafe. But several neighbors had seen the whole thing, and not one of them backed up her version. As officers began asking questions and bodycam footage started to tell a different story, Cheryl's account began to fall apart. But before anyone could breathe easy, something even more unexpected happened. As more neighbors gathered around, the situation grew tense. Some were quietly filming, others whispering about what they'd seen. A few brave ones started speaking up, telling officers that Marcus hadn't done anything wrong, that he hadn't even spoken to Cheryl before the police were called. One woman, an older resident named Linda, said she'd watched the whole thing from her porch. He was just cutting his hedge, she told the officer. Didn't even look in her direction. Still, Cheryl stood by her claim, insisting she felt threatened. Meanwhile, Marcus was shaken but trying to stay calm. He told the officers he had no contact with Cheryl before this moment. In fact, he wasn't even aware she lived across the street until the police pulled up. It was his first real encounter with anyone from the HOA, and it came with flashing lights and suspicion. You could see the confusion on his face, wondering how things escalated so quickly. But that wasn't the only layer to the story. Another neighbor quietly mentioned that this wasn't the first time Cheryl had filed a questionable report. There'd been other incidents, minor, brushed off by the board, but now people were starting to connect the dots. Had she been using her HOA role to intimidate new residents? As officers reviewed the neighborhood's security footage and asked more questions, the story kept unraveling. But then, someone revealed something from Cheryl's past that no one expected, and it changed everything they thought they knew about her motives. As the officers dug deeper, a strange shift came over the crowd. People who had once stayed quiet about Cheryl's behavior were now stepping forward. One man, a retired teacher named Rob, shared that Cheryl had filed a noise complaint against his grandson just for playing basketball in the driveway. Another neighbor pulled up a copy of an email thread from a few months back where Cheryl accused a family of suspicious activity because they had out-of-state plates. No one had really questioned her before, but today, something felt different. Then came the twist no one saw coming. A younger neighbor, Jenna, who had lived in the community for just under a year, revealed she had filed a formal complaint with the HOA against Cheryl weeks ago. She claimed Cheryl had been watching her home, taking photos of her guests' cars, and even left warning letters on her door that weren't officially approved by the board. Jenna said she felt targeted and uncomfortable, but when she brought it up, it was brushed aside. Now, everything she said started to make sense. The officers, now clearly suspicious, pulled Cheryl aside for more questioning. Her tone shifted, less confident, more defensive. She started stammering, backtracking on parts of her story, and then came the moment that sent a chill through the crowd. One of the officers, after reviewing nearby doorbell cam footage, turned to Cheryl and asked a question in a serious tone. Her face went pale. The energy shifted again, and everyone knew something big was about to go down. The officer's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Ma'am, can you explain why you're seen approaching Mr. Rivers' property before your 911 call?" The footage clearly showed Cheryl stepping onto Marcus's front walkway, snapping pictures with her phone, and pointing at something on his lawn. It was a far cry from her earlier story about being chased. Gasps rippled through the growing crowd. Cheryl froze. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Before she could answer, another voice chimed in. It was HOA board member Alan, who had been standing quietly on the sidelines the whole time. "This isn't the first time she's taken things too far," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We had complaints, real ones, but they were shut down before they even made it to a vote. That bombshell changed everything. It wasn't just one person's overreaction anymore. It was starting to look like a pattern of abuse of power from someone who had been hiding behind her HOA title for years." As Alan spoke, he pulled out his phone and showed officers screenshots of internal HOA messages, ones where Cheryl had pushed for stricter neighborhood patrols, especially targeting newer residents. Some of the language she used in those messages raised eyebrows. The officers glanced at each other, their expressions tightening. What started as a strange neighbor dispute had now turned into something much bigger: questions about discrimination, misuse of authority, and how far someone was willing to go to control a community. And just when it felt like the truth was finally coming to light, one of the officers got a call that changed everything. The officer stepped away to answer his radio, his face tightening as he listened. A few moments later, he returned with a serious look and called over his partner. "We just got confirmation from dispatch," he said, lowering his voice just enough for the nearby crowd to strain to hear. The same number that placed today's 911 call also made a similar report 2 months ago. Same claims, different person. That earlier report had quietly been dismissed due to lack of evidence. But now, with everything stacking up, it was clear. This wasn't a one-time panic. It was a pattern. Cheryl's face dropped. She tried to interrupt, to explain herself, but the words didn't land the way they had before. The bodycam footage, the doorbell video, the witness accounts, none of it lined up with her story. As the officer began reading her the consequences of filing a false report, the once commanding HOA president could only stand there, silent, her authority slipping away with each word. The crowd, now completely tuned in, watched as the very woman who claimed to be in danger was held accountable for creating it. Marcus, still standing by, was finally cleared of all suspicion. The officers apologized for the scare and explained what would happen next with the investigation. He nodded, still a little stunned, but grateful the truth had come out. And just when it felt like everything had reached its peak, Alan stepped forward again, this time with an envelope in his hand. "We weren't going to do this today," he said, glancing around, "but the board just voted this morning." He handed Cheryl a letter. It was official. she'd been removed from her position on the HOA. But the twist? Cheryl wasn't just the HOA president, she was also the developer's daughter, and losing that seat meant losing her influence over the entire neighborhood's future. And suddenly, this wasn't just about one lie, it was about everything she stood to lose. In the days that followed, the neighborhood began to settle, but things weren't quite the same. People who had once just nodded politely at each other during trash day were now talking openly, sharing stories, experiences, and finally acknowledging how long this tension had been quietly building.